Hi, I'm Jethro. I was the sister they only remembered when a plate needed clearing or a bill needed covering. At my niece's wedding, my own sister stood before 300 guests and joked. "She's just here for the free food." Laughter echoed. No one defended me, not even my mother. But what they didn't know was that I'd paid for the venue. And the moment that limousine pulled into the driveway, their silence finally matched mine. What kind of family applauds your erasure? Until you rewrite the ending yourself. I still remember the heat that day, the kind that sticks to your skin even when the sun starts to fall. The wedding was held at a sprawling estate just outside Austin. The grass was trimmed within an inch of perfection, the air thick with money and flowers. It was Callista's big day, the one everyone said would finally bring our family together again. I knew better. I'd driven myself, no +1, no one waiting for me at the valet. My old silver sedan looked out of place next to the lineup of luxury cars. I tried not to notice. I pressed down my nerves, the way you press a wrinkle out of a tablecloth, quickly, before anyone sees it. At the entrance, a young woman in black carried a clipboard and a forced smile. "Name?" she asked. "Jethro Hart." Her pen hovered. "How do you spell that?" I repeated it slowly. She scanned the list again, frown deepening. I don't see it here. Maybe check with catering." It took me a second to understand. "I'm not with the staff," I said quietly. She blushed, looked back at her papers, and finally pointed to the far side of the lawn. "We've got a few open seats in the staff section, if you'd like to rest until we sort it out." And I went. I don't even know why. Maybe I didn't want to make a scene. Maybe I'd been trained all my life to make myself smaller when things got uncomfortable. I found a folding chair near the catering tent, tucked between two young waiters scrolling on their phones. They looked up briefly, then went back to their screens. From where I sat, I could see everything, the guests arriving in shimmering gowns, the laughter, the flash of cameras. My family was scattered among the front tables, where each name was printed on thick ivory cards. Mine was nowhere. The ceremony began just as the sky softened to gold. Callista glided down the aisle, her gown catching the light like spun sugar. She was radiant, perfect, every inch the golden daughter. People rose to their feet. My hands clapped automatically, but the sound felt hollow. After the vows, a jazz band started playing under the tent. Servers moved like a ballet, setting down plates of lamb and wine glasses that sparkled in the fading light. I stayed in my little corner, nursing a glass of water, pretending to check my phone so no one would see the loneliness in my eyes. Then came the speeches. Callista stood, microphone in hand, glowing in the spotlight. "I just want to thank everyone who made this day so special," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. She listed names, her husband, her friends, the planner, even the florist. Each got a round of applause. Then her eyes found me. She paused, her lips curving into that familiar half-smile, the one that always meant trouble. "Oh," she said, as if she'd just remembered. "And my little sister's here too, probably just for the free food." Laughter rolled through the tent. Not nervous laughter, real, full-bodied amusement. Cameras flashed. Someone even clapped. I felt the world tilt. For a split second, I thought she was joking, that maybe she'd wink at me and say, "Kidding." But she didn't. She looked right at me, eyes gleaming, enjoying the show. I could feel heat spreading across my chest, crawling up my neck. My throat went dry, but no words came. Every muscle in my body screamed to get up, to walk away, but my legs were heavy. My hands trembled in my lap, gripping the edge of my skirt so tightly my knuckles went white. A cousin across the table gave me an awkward half-smile, then turned back to his drink. My mother looked down at her plate. My father's chair was empty. He'd been gone for years, and somehow his absence hurt more than ever in that moment. Callista's laughter faded into the chatter of the crowd. The music swelled again. Life continued as if nothing had happened. Only I sat there, frozen, trying not to let the tears show. The band switched to a livelier tune. Couples began to dance. I stared at the string lights above, their glow blurring into halos. I told myself not to cry. Not here. Not now. I took a slow breath, letting the air burn its way down. My hands stopped shaking. I sat a little straighter. I wasn't going to give her what she wanted, the scene, the satisfaction. But I couldn't stop the voice in my head repeating her words. Just for the free food. They echoed every time someone laughed, every time a camera flashed. I became invisible, a ghost wandering through my own family celebration. At some point, a waiter leaned over and whispered, "Ma'am, would you like another drink?" I wanted to say yes, to anything that would drown the ache, but I shook my head. I'm fine. Fine. The word meant nothing, but it was all I had left to hold on to. When the sun finally slipped below the horizon, the lights grew warmer, the laughter louder. I stood once, thinking I might leave, but my body refused. I sat again. It felt safer to disappear quietly than to walk across that lawn while everyone was still watching. I thought about the last time Callista and I had spoken, 6 months earlier, when she'd called to say she was engaged. I had sent a small check to help with expenses, even though she never asked. She hadn't mentioned it since. Now I realized she probably never would. The night air turned cooler. I wrapped my arms around myself. Somewhere behind me, the catering team was cleaning up trays, chatting about tips. One of them, a young man with tired eyes, offered me a smile. "You okay, ma'am?" I nodded. "Yeah. Just needed a moment." He nodded back, respectful, then moved on. For a fleeting second, I felt grateful to a stranger for seeing me when my own family couldn't. When the band announced the final dance, I stood again. My legs ached from sitting still too long. I watched Callista twirl under the lights, surrounded by everyone who mattered to her. She caught my eye once more, gave a tiny wave, mocking or polite, I couldn't tell. I smiled back anyway. A quiet smile, not for her, but for myself. I knew something had cracked open inside me. Not just pain, something sharper, steadier. By the time the guests began to leave, I had made a promise, not out loud, but deep in my bones, I wouldn't forget this. And I wouldn't let them define me anymore. I waited until the last song ended, until even the laughter began to fade. Then I stood, brushed the dirt from my heels, and walked toward the exit. As I passed the catering tent, one of the servers called out, "You did great tonight." I almost laughed. "Thanks," I said. "Guess I'm part of the staff now." The words surprised me, they didn't sound bitter. They sounded awake. The night smelled of jasmine and wet grass. I looked back once at the glowing estate, at the tent full of people who hadn't seen me all evening. For the first time, I didn't ache to be part of it. And yet, as I sat there frozen, the one person I needed most remained completely silent. The night air was cooling as I lingered just outside the glowing reception tent, standing beneath strings of fairy lights that swayed gently in the breeze. Laughter drifted toward me, bright, carefree, polished. The kind of laughter that fit perfectly with the clinking of champagne flutes and the sweep of violins playing some curated love song. My heels pinched. My feet ached. Still, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. Something inside me, something stubborn, wounded, needed to see her. I needed to meet my mother's eyes. Maybe I wanted an apology. Maybe I just wanted to be acknowledged. So I stepped back inside. The tent glowed golden. The scent of roses and sugared champagne hung in the air. People milled about in picture-perfect clusters, posing for photos, joking, sampling tiny desserts from polished trays. The earlier sting of humiliation felt worlds away from this carefully orchestrated celebration. I scanned the crowd. And then, I saw her. My mother. She stood by the dance floor, radiant as ever, talking animatedly with one of Callista's new in-laws. Her hair was swept into a graceful knot, and the dress she wore shimmered like dusk. She looked happy, unbothered, like she belonged in a painting. I hesitated, waited. Our eyes met, just briefly. And in that moment, my chest lifted with hope. Maybe she'd walk toward me. Maybe she'd say something comforting or kind. But she didn't. She turned away. Smiled at the man beside her. Raised her glass in a toast I wasn't part of. And just like that, I was 13 again. Just like that, her silence returned, polite, practiced, and sharp. The kind of silence that looked lovely in a photo album but could hollow out a child without ever raising a voice. I stood still for too long. I felt the warm current of celebration move around me, like I was just a stone in the stream. My mother's laughter floated back, light and flawless. I walked slowly to the bar and picked up a flute of untouched champagne. I didn't drink it. Just watched the bubbles rise and vanish, over and over again. She had done this before. At school, years ago, I stood on a tiny auditorium stage with a gold-painted paper crown on my head. The principal had announced my name, but the seat reserved for my mother sat empty. The other kids' moms waved and snapped pictures. Mine arrived after the ceremony, breathless and smiling. "Don't be so sensitive," she had said, tucking my crown in her purse like a paper napkin. "You're stronger than that." I wasn't. I was just used to pretending. Back in the tent, I gently set the champagne down and wandered toward the edge of the crowd. Just then, my Aunt Sylvia brushed my arm. "Sweetheart, you all right?" she asked, eyes already scanning the dance floor. "It's something," I said, managing a smile. She smiled back, satisfied with the vague answer, and disappeared. The announcer's voice rang out, "Ladies and gentlemen, please turn your attention to the screen for the family photo montage." A murmur of excitement swept the room. I almost turned to leave, but I didn't. Something, curiosity or cruelty to myself, made me stay. The lights dimmed. Soft piano music began. And there she was. Callista, swaddled in pink. Callista with her first bicycle. Callista hugging our mother at every milestone, school, college, her engagement. Frame after frame. All smiles. All perfect. Not one photo of me. Not one. My breath caught. I had been there. I had taken some of those very pictures. Paid for others. Arranged half the events. And yet in this version of the story, the version they'd chosen to show, I didn't exist. A cousin nearby whispered, "Didn't they have more photos?" Another shrugged. Maybe she wasn't around much. I was. But I wasn't in the pictures. And in this family, that was the same thing. The montage ended with a magazine-perfect shot, Callista and my mother, cheek to cheek, laughing in matching colors. The applause was immediate. Loud. I didn't clap. I just stood there, blinking through the burn in my eyes. A single tear slipped down, carving through my makeup. I wiped it quickly. No one noticed. Someone nearby sighed, "What a beautiful family." That word again. Family. As if it applied to all of us. I turned and saw her again, my mother, straightening Callista's veil, whispering something that made her laugh. They looked like actresses in a scene they'd rehearsed a dozen times. And in that moment the illusion cracked. It wasn't that she didn't know how to love. It wasn't that she didn't show affection. She just didn't choose to give it to me. I slipped out before the cake was cut. Outside, the air was cooler. Quieter. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the lawn. I walked to the edge of the fountain and stared into the water. My reflection shimmered, faint, unfamiliar. Silence can be brutal. Louder than shouting, sharper than slaps. Hers had always been the worst kind, the kind that erased you without ever naming the crime. My phone buzzed. A message from a coworker, home safe yet? I typed back, still here. Don't ask why. The music swelled again from inside. More cheering. Cake, probably. I closed my eyes. And strangely, I didn't feel like crying. I felt something else. Hollow. But that hollowness had edges now, hardening into something that almost felt like resolve. Later, when the last of the guests had gone, I sat in my car, watching the lights of the estate fade in my rearview mirror. The laughter still rang in my ears. I started the engine. Drove home under a sky scattered with stars. Every image from the night replayed in my mind, Callista's smirk. My mother's silence. The ghost of a slideshow that pretended I never lived. When I reached my house, it was dark and still. I unlocked the door. Turned on one lamp. Let the quiet settle. But this silence. This one was mine. That night, I opened an old drawer I hadn't touched in years. And there, buried beneath forgotten papers, I found the first truth that made it all begin to make sense. The drawer groaned as I pulled it open, hesitant, like it too remembered. I hadn't touched it in years, maybe out of fear, maybe out of quiet resignation. But today, something in me stirred, a need to see the past, not for nostalgia, but for clarity. The air inside the drawer was stale, scented with forgotten paper and time. My fingers sifted through a mix of faded Polaroids, old report cards, and brittle envelopes whose glue had long surrendered. Tucked at the bottom was a small, torn shoebox labeled in slanted handwriting, childhood. I hesitated before lifting the lid, as if I were about to awaken something sacred, or cursed. Inside, among crayon drawings and birthday cards, lay my old diary. Its purple vinyl cover was cracked, the once sparkling sticker of a unicorn now faded into a dull gray blur. The edges of the pages were curled, browned by time and neglect. I held it to my chest for a moment before flipping it open. A page fluttered loose, landing on my lap. I recognized my childlike handwriting instantly, large, messy, hopeful. Today I helped Mom bake cookies. She smiled at me. The sentence was underlined twice, followed by a wobbly heart. My thumb brushed the ink, and I couldn't tell if I wanted to erase the memory or fall back into it. I carried the diary to the window, where the amber streetlights glowed through October fog. As I stared into the night, that kitchen returned to me, flour dusted across the counter, the smell of warm vanilla in the air, and my small hands proudly placing chocolate chips like treasure on raw dough. I blinked. Then I remembered what came next. I heard soft footsteps behind me, faster and louder than mine ever were. Callista's voice, older and already sharper, broke the silence. "What's this?" she said, snatching the diary from my lap like a hawk swooping in. "Give it back." I had yelped, lunging forward. But she flipped through the pages, smirking. Then, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "Mom, our cousins, the babysitter," she read in a mocking tone, "helped Mom bake cookies. She smiled at me. She cackled, and from the hallway, someone else giggled. That small crow of laughter still echoed in my chest. I hadn't cried then. I just stood frozen, cheeks burning. It wasn't about the diary, it was about what I had written. That I had believed that one smile meant something. And she wanted everyone to see how foolish that was. That memory faded like mist, but the feeling stayed, dense and cold. Back at my desk, I laid the diary down, flipping through more pages, messy poems, concert tickets, dream house sketches, birthday lists. A timeline of invisible moments. Each entry a breadcrumb, trying to prove I mattered. I found one from when I was 13. Got a new dress today. I thought maybe she'd hug me. That birthday had passed quietly, no gift, no call, just silence. While that same night, a surprise party was thrown for Callista for landing an internship at some magazine. Mom had smiled with pride, her voice full of warmth as she said, "We had to celebrate where things mattered." I closed the diary slowly, tears hot behind my eyes. But I didn't let them fall. I was starting to see the pattern, how love had been rationed like currency, and I was never given more than scraps. I turned to the sketches on my desk, room layouts, lighting designs, color palettes. My work. My sanctuary. If I had never been the daughter, then this was how I built an identity. My way of taking up space. I picked up my phone and called Sable Wynn, my lawyer and the only friend who knew what silence cost me. She answered quickly. "Hey. You okay?" "Not really," I said. My voice cracked. I told her about the diary. The entries. The memories. She was quiet, then said, "You want me to dig into that box? See what else is there? Maybe it's more than just a diary." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Do it," I whispered. That night, I fell asleep at my desk, the diary open, one page fluttering like a heartbeat. Morning light slipped through the blinds, pale and gray. I moved slowly, made coffee, stood at the sink, watched leaves fall in silence. Then I drove toward the estate. The insult from that night still buzzed under my skin. The reception hall sat still under the soft wind. The same fairy lights overhead now twitched faintly in the breeze, like blinking stars trying to forget. I stepped inside. Staff were clearing the last of the side dishes. My heels were quiet on the marble. I wandered toward the banquet room. The massive screen was off now, blank and lifeless. But I could still feel its hum. I touched the corner of its frame, remembering how the slideshow had danced without a single image of me. A moment later, I slipped to the AV control panel. It was unlocked. Curiosity, or maybe something deeper, guided my fingers. I tapped the screen. It flickered to life. Thumbnail previews loaded. A folder titled, Family Legacy. I opened it. Images popped up. Hundreds of them. Callista, her baby pictures, graduation, award ceremonies, lavish vacations. Mom beaming beside her. Dad holding her close. Their life. I scrolled further. Not one image of me. My throat tightened. This wasn't an accident. This was curation. A story carefully crafted, one where I simply didn't exist. I took photos of the screen. Proof. Then I left quietly. Back at home that night, I returned to the diary. I drew a line down a page, 2 columns, what I remember and what they recorded. Under one, entries like, first piano recital. No one came. Under the other, Callista's dance solo, front page of family newsletter. The contrast grew sickeningly clear. Their silence wasn't passive. It was policy. As evening fell, I whispered aloud, barely recognizing my voice, I was never the daughter. I was the burden. But naming it, saying it, lifted something. The shame wasn't mine. I stood, locked the drawer again, but this time, I didn't shut it all the way. Let someone find it one day. Let them see what was hidden. The next morning, I discovered something even worse than being forgotten. I had been erased. That morning, the drawer felt heavier than usual. I pulled it open and took the diary like it was evidence, fragile, powerful, dangerous. I didn't want to spend the day pacing around my apartment, stuck in loops of thought, so when Callista's cousin invited me to a post-wedding, family appreciation brunch, I said yes. I told myself it might help, fresh air, forced smiles, something to push the noise in my head aside. Bellevue in spring is all fresh-cut grass and sunshine with hints of expensive coffee. The brunch was held in a sleek community center, neutral art, pastel linens, and smiling volunteers. When I walked in, someone handed me a program. A place card with my name sat at the head table, misspelled, one letter off, like I didn't quite belong. Small detail, yes. But it hit with a quiet cruelty, like a paper cut over a scar. I kept my posture upright and my face calm. People were still glowing from last night's celebrations, full of practiced warmth. I had my lines rehearsed, safe, polite, forgettable. But inside, I felt like someone who had shown up to a play only to realize my role had been cut without notice. Then came the slideshow. The lights dimmed. Soft piano music played. The screen lit up with snapshots of family milestones, birthdays, holidays, vacations. Callista sparkled in nearly every frame, laughing with mom on a ski trip, holding a diploma at graduation, posing under fairy lights at backyard barbecues. Our mother appeared often too, always beaming beside her favorite child. I watched each photo like it was a slow burn. Frame by frame, I kept searching, for even a glimpse of myself. Nothing. Not a single shot. Not even a blurry figure in the background. It wasn't oversight. It was surgical. Around me, the murmurs began. I guess she wasn't around much, someone whispered. I didn't see her at the rehearsal either, another added. A cousin leaned closer to his friend and said, some people just fade away. I looked to my mother. She sat composed, fingers resting on her napkin. No shock on her face. No correction. Just a small smile in Callista's direction, like she was privately proud of the rewrite. I stood. I walked toward the AV table, where the technician was adjusting sound levels. He looked up, startled. Hi. I remember you, you're the quiet one, right? Who put the slideshow together? I asked, my voice calm but clipped. He listed a few names, then mentioned Callista's event planner. I nodded. Of course. Back at the table, I tried not to tremble. Do you remember the calls I made when Dad was in the hospital? The Christmas I hosted when no one else stepped up? The shed I painted by myself in July? The words slipped out like breath, almost to myself. Callista glanced over, mid-conversation. We just didn't find a photo where you weren't. In the background, she said, with a soft chuckle. The kind people use when they want others to laugh without looking cruel. And some did. A few, politely. A few, nervously. I stared at her. Keep trying to erase me, I said, voice steady. One day, I won't be quiet about it. Her smile flickered, just for a second. Then she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and replied with a sigh, loud enough for everyone, oh, Jethro. You just never mattered enough to remember. And there it was. The blade, coated in sugar. The air in the room turned dense. My aunt muttered something about keeping it pleasant, as if civility would glue it all back together. But it was too late. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. The brunch continued, awkwardly. Waiters served dishes no one really touched. People chatted in lowered voices, carefully avoiding eye contact with me. I stepped outside when I could, into the courtyard where ivy climbed stone walls and sunlight filtered through tree branches. I sat alone on a bench, my hands folded, my thoughts louder than ever. Through the glass doors, I saw them, Callista and Mom, heads close, laughing like co-conspirators. It wasn't just neglect anymore. It was strategy. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd removed me. And then something snapped into focus. If they could control the story here, they could do it anywhere. Legacies, wills, family records, they all depended on memory. And memory, apparently, could be edited. Later, when the guests were thinning out, I caught the slideshow technician again. "Do you have the files?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yeah, I kept a backup." "Want to see?" I followed him to his laptop. He clicked through folders, family_legacy_final, Callista_moments_approved. Then he opened the layout. My heart sank when I saw it. Metadata, creator, Callista planner_03. Notes, highlight Callista milestones, minimize peripheral figures. I took a photo of the screen with my phone. Evidence, not to confront them, but to remember. This wasn't just hurt feelings. It was narrative theft. I left without another word. Back home, I sat in my car for a long while before going inside. I thought of childhood birthdays, late-night phone calls, the time I stayed overnight in a hospital chair just to make sure Mom wasn't alone. Those moments weren't in the slideshow. But they were real. I carried them like threads they thought they could cut. That night, I opened my laptop. I started a folder. I named it Presents. Inside, I saved every piece of proof I could find. Receipts, photos, emails, texts, transfer confirmations. I wasn't making a revenge file. I was restoring a record. The ache in my chest didn't vanish, but it found a purpose. They tried to erase me. They handed me the eraser. But I picked up the pen. The next day arrived warm and bright, the kind of Washington afternoon that looks perfect from a distance but feels heavy once you step into it. I had slept little, my thoughts replaying the brunch and every deliberate omission like a movie I couldn't turn off. Still, I told myself to show up when the invitation came, a final, family dinner, in Callista's backyard before everyone flew home. It was supposed to be casual, just a little get-together, she'd written. The tone was light, rehearsed, deceptively harmless. I arrived around 4. The house gleamed in late sunlight, the lawn freshly cut, tables set under white tents. The same guests from the wedding lingered around, voices soft with polite exhaustion. Someone grilled salmon near the back patio, the smell mixed with lilacs. I stood near the gate for a moment, breathing in, pretending I was only there to say goodbye. Callista spotted me first. "Look who decided to grace us," she called out, a little too loud, earning a few laughs. I smiled, small and controlled. "Traffic," I said simply, and made my way toward an empty seat. Dinner passed quietly enough at first. Conversation drifted around new jobs, baby showers, vacation homes. I stayed silent, half listening, tracing my finger along the rim of my glass. The sun began to sink, and fairy lights flickered to life overhead. It could almost have been peaceful. Almost. Then Callista stood, tapping a fork against her glass. "Before everyone leaves," she announced, her grin spreading wide, "I've got something special for my sister." She gestured toward me like a magician introducing her assistant. "A little token of family love, and humor. Someone handed her a small gift box wrapped in cheap silver paper. I didn't move. She walked it over herself, staged smile intact, and placed it in front of me. "Go on," she said. "Open it." I hesitated. Something in her voice prickled. But everyone's eyes were on me, expectant. I tore at the wrapping. Inside was a folded black t-shirt, neatly packed. I lifted it, unfolded the cotton fabric, and read the bold white letters printed across the chest. "Family moocher, always shows up hungry." For half a second, there was silence, then laughter exploded around me. Full, hearty laughter that shook the air. Even the uncle at the end of the table chuckled nervously before catching himself. Cameras came out. Someone clapped. The sound came to me dull and distorted, as if underwater. My fingers clenched around the fabric. I felt the texture of the ink under my thumb, rough, cheap, permanent. My stomach turned. "Come on, it's just a joke," Callista said, waving her hands, eyes wide with mock innocence. "You've got to admit it's funny." No one told her it wasn't. My mother sipped her wine, avoiding my gaze. Someone murmured, "That's so Callista," and the laughter rolled on, thinner now, uneasy at the edges. I stood slowly. The movement quieted the noise in increments, like a dimmer switch turning down the volume. The shirt hung limply in my hand. I looked at it, then at her. "When you laugh at someone's hunger," I said quietly, "it says more about your soul than their stomach." The silence that followed was almost holy. No one breathed. Even the wind seemed to pause. I watched her expression shift, first confusion, then irritation. "Oh, come on," she said finally, forcing a light laugh. "Don't be so dramatic. It was a joke, Jethro." I tilted my head, meeting her eyes squarely. "So was I said. Until I stopped being one." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The crowd's discomfort grew thick and palpable. Someone coughed. Another whispered, "Good for her," under their breath. I laid the shirt gently on the table, as though returning something worthless. Then I turned toward the exit. "Wait, don't do this now," my mother called softly, her tone careful, not out of love but out of fear of attention. I stopped but didn't turn. "Do what, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Ask for basic respect. Or not laugh when I'm the punchline." She said nothing. Her silence had become its own language, one I was tired of translating. I took one more look at her, the woman who had taught me to keep quiet to survive embarrassment, and I finally understood that her silence wasn't protection. It was compliance. The backyard lights blurred as I walked away. Behind me, someone muttered, "That went too far." Another voice replied, "She didn't deserve that." I didn't know if they meant me or Callista, and for the first time, I didn't care. By the time I reached the gate, Callista called after me. "You always make everything about you, don't you?" I stopped, turned slightly. "Maybe if you stopped making everything about you, I wouldn't have to." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't reply. I stepped out into the front yard, the cool evening air cutting through the heat that had been rising under my skin all day. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked toward the curb. Somewhere behind me, a door slammed, somewhere else, laughter started again, forced and hollow. I looked up at the sky, the same blue-gray of the night before, and exhaled. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else, something close to liberation. I got to my car, opened the door, and sat for a moment without turning on the engine. My reflection stared back at me in the windshield. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright, not with tears, but with something sharper. All my life, I'd swallowed their jokes, their silences, their small cruelties dressed up as humor. But tonight, something cracked open inside me. I realized I'd spent years apologizing for existing in a family that never once said, "Thank you," for all I gave. They wanted me to play small. To laugh along. To absorb the ridicule so no one had to see the ugliness of their own behavior. I wasn't going to do that anymore. A flicker of movement caught my eye, headlights turning into the driveway. A sleek black limousine rolled up, its polished surface reflecting the porch lights. Guests craned their necks, curious. I smiled faintly. Because for the first time, I wasn't just leaving the party. I was leaving their narrative. And soon, they were going to see exactly what it looked like when the person they called the moocher stopped playing by their rules. But the moment the limousine pulled into the driveway, I realized silence wasn't my weapon anymore, action was. At first, I thought the sound of an engine was something my imagination had conjured, wishful thinking in the middle of my embarrassment. But then came the headlights, sweeping across the lawn, lighting up the backyard like a stage. Conversation halted. Jokes died on lips. Every head turned. The limousine stopped with a grace that made time feel choreographed. It was sleek, black, and gleaming. Its windows dark, its body reflecting the very guests who had spent the entire evening ignoring or mocking me. A few people stood up from their seats, craning to see. Others whispered with barely concealed curiosity. I didn't move. I wanted the silence to do what my words never could. The driver stepped out in a tailored suit, moving with quiet authority. He walked around the car and opened the rear door. Then, looking right at me, he said, "Miss Jethro, we're ready for you." My name, spoken with formality, not contempt, rang louder than any insult I'd heard that night. It sliced through the air and the brittle egos seated around the table. For a moment, it seemed no one could process it. Callista's wine glass froze midway to her mouth. My cousin coughed awkwardly. A neighbor's child looked around, sensing tension but not understanding it. I stood slowly, letting my chair scrape gently against the stone patio. My dress shimmered slightly under the lights. I smoothed it with both hands and took my time. My legs didn't shake. My heels didn't falter. Callista stood too, napkin slipping from her lap onto the grass. "Wait, what's happening? Who sent that car?" Her voice was sharp now, her earlier performance crumbling. I looked at her without anger. When someone rises quietly, I said, people think they're not rising at all. She blinked, as if slapped by words too subtle to defend against. Around me, the tension was electric. My mother sat like a statue, her fork resting against the porcelain plate, her face pale. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, not meeting my eyes. The driver motioned toward the open door, waiting. I walked toward it without hurry. My steps felt grounded. I could hear murmurs behind me, "She's with them. What's going on? Is this a joke?" Let them whisper. They had spoken over me for years. Now they could talk behind my back instead. Before entering the car, I turned slightly and said evenly, "Thank you for the reminder. Sometimes being treated like nothing helps you remember who you truly are." Then I stepped in. The door shut with a gentle click, final, dignified. It felt like the closing note of a long, painful song. Inside, the limo smelled of leather and something warm, cedarwood, maybe. Soft jazz floated through the cabin. I took a breath, then another, the kind you take when you realize you're finally somewhere safe. "Back to the hotel, ma'am?" the driver asked. "No," I said. "Bennett Center. Boardroom." He nodded and drove. Through the tinted windows, the backyard shrank, lights dimming into distance. I saw Callista's silhouette, confused, clinging to control that had never truly been hers. My mother's figure stood at the porch, still and ghost-like. I let the silence wrap around me like a bomb. I kicked off my heels and pressed my feet into the carpeted floor, feeling grounded in a way I hadn't in years. Everything came rushing back, the birthdays missed, the errands dumped on me, the jokes that made me the punchline at every table. I had been the shadow in their photo albums. The one cropped out of the family stories. But not anymore. My phone buzzed in my clutch. 3 missed calls. One from Callista. One from an unknown number. And a message from my mother, "Please don't make a scene." I almost laughed. They had always made the scene. I had only chosen to leave it. The limousine slipped through the quiet of suburban streets, then onto the highway. City lights began to glow ahead. Seattle shimmered like possibility. The Bennett Center rose in the distance, a sleek glass tower I had poured nights and years into. It was my space. My name was in contracts no one in that backyard had ever read. Callista's husband once bragged at a wedding about securing a partnership there. He had no idea he'd been boasting about doing business with me. The folder on my lap bore the words, "Foundations Fund." Inside, donor records, grants, correspondence. I had anonymously supported the very foundation that paid for tonight's venue. The irony. Almost poetic. They thought they were hosting the event. I had been funding the floor beneath their feet. As the limo turned onto Fifth Avenue, my reflection in the window stared back, older, yes, but stronger. Sharper. Present. "Miss Jethro," the driver said gently, "we've arrived." We stopped in front of the Bennett Center. Security nodded respectfully as I stepped out. "Evening, ma'am." "Evening," I replied. My voice didn't waver. I walked into the marble lobby, past the reception desk, toward the private elevators. My reflection multiplied in the mirrored walls. I didn't shrink from it. For the first time, I felt seen, even by myself. Inside the elevator, I pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors closed, I caught my own eyes in the reflection. "They thought they had shut me out," I whispered. "But I've been at the head of the table all along." The soft hum of the elevator still echoed in my ears as I stepped onto the top floor of the Bennett Center. The boardroom doors glided open with the same polished smoothness I once used to hide my presence. Now, I walked in to be seen. 3 days had passed since the brunch disaster. In that time, the world shifted, quietly, but decisively. News of accounting anomalies surrounding Brooklyn events had begun to surface. The same company that handled Callista's lavish wedding. The same company that had billed one of my subsidiaries for items like imported orchids and 7-tier cakes. Coincidence? Hardly. It was time for the silence to speak. The meeting was called for 9 a.m., sharp. As I entered, eyes turned. Around the long mahogany table sat board members, legal counsel, auditors, faces both familiar and calculating. At the far end, the screen glowed with the Bennett Holdings logo, waiting for a truth it wasn't ready to display. I sat at the head. "Thank you all for coming on short notice." A wave of murmured greetings followed. Some faces wore tension, others wore curiosity. Most were waiting to see what role I would play in this unfolding storm. The senior accountant, visibly nervous, stood with a file in his trembling hands. "Ms. Hart, as requested, we compiled all financial records tied to Brooklyn events. We found the charges originated from accounts under your oversight." A low murmur passed across the room. I nodded calmly. "Show them." With a click, the projector came alive. Rows of data populated the screen, transaction IDs, dates, vendors. One figure stood out in red. Vendor, Brooklyn Events. Description, family celebration event. Amount, $187,000. Authorized by J. Hart, Bennett Holdings Private Fund. A hush fell over the room. Another slide, an email thread between Brooklyn and an assistant. The subject line read, Payment Confirmation, Hart Family Wedding. Attached, a voice memo played, Callista's voice, syrupy and smug. Oh, it's fine, my sister's company covers these things. She won't say no. A sharp inhale from someone. A whisper, this is her sister's wedding. The accountant continued. More files, more damning entries. Charges categorized as charity, consulting, branding. All pointing back to one source, Callista. She's on the Zoom call, someone pointed out. And there she was, her image on the monitor. Impeccably dressed, seated in a curated backdrop of white roses and luxury. Her voice came sharp and dismissive. What is this? Why are personal matters being dragged into a corporate meeting? Because they were billed to corporate accounts, I replied. She scoffed. You haven't been involved for years. I didn't even think you still worked here. I met her gaze. That's the thing about being invisible. People forget it's a choice. I pressed a key. The next slide showed a vendor memo, instructions from C. Hart to redirect Bennett Foundation gifts to her bridal registry initiative. The room erupted. One board member snapped, do you know what kind of liability this creates? Callista's face flushed. She's twisting it, Jethro must have. I didn't twist anything, I said. I just stopped cleaning up the mess. Her voice rose, panicked now. This is revenge, isn't it? Because of the wedding. Revenge, I said slowly, would have been staying silent. This is accountability. Another document appeared, foundation funds misused to cover spa retreats, designer jewelry, partnership dinners, that never happened. The murmuring grew louder. Shame buzzed under every breath. I stood. For years, I let people believe I was the agreeable one. The one who wouldn't question. But every expense Callista charged, every lie she lived, was built on the back of my silence. Her image glitched, then froze entirely. The head of compliance looked to me. Ms. Hart, how do you wish to proceed? Freeze her accounts, I said. Initiate a full audit. File a breach of fiduciary trust and seek restitution. Silence. But this time, it wasn't weakness, it was acknowledgement. I turned to the screen. You told the world I showed up for scraps, Callista. But I was the one who fed everyone at the table. Her image blinked out. And just like that, the room exhaled. Words followed, bold, brutal, necessary. No one looked me in the eye. That suited me fine. As the room emptied, I stood by the window. The city pulsed below, steel and glass glinting in the morning light. I didn't feel buried beneath it anymore. I thought of my mother then, how she raised me on restraint, how she taught me to hold in every word, every tear. She hadn't given me a voice, but she prepared me to sharpen the silence into something stronger. The projector flickered off. I slid the files into a leather folder. Before leaving, I turned once more to the empty chairs. But the truth, I whispered, still has one more witness. I switched off the lights. The city reflected in the glass behind me, darker now, but clearer. I came straight from the Bennett Center that morning, tense, alert, drinking coffee from a paper cup in the back of the limo, eyes squeezed shut while memories played like broken film frames. But I'd blocked out only one thought all week, a promise made in silence, the chance of a witness, someone who knew enough to change everything. The gala at St. Florian Cathedral was more than symbols and speeches. It was ceremony, power, curation of public perception, and tonight, I intended to reframe everything. The cathedral's stained-glass windows cast jelly-colored light across the pews, the hush of arrival, the clipping of heels against marble aisles, the distant organ chords, all of it felt charged. They introduced me not as a guest but as a keynote patron, a quiet benefactor of the center's revival fund. I was seated among civic leaders and donors. Programs that originally credited Callista as committee chair had been quietly edited last night. In every copy, her name was crossed out and replaced, support provided by J.H. A reshuffling of credit but a bold public statement. I took the stage. The room's hush wrapped itself around me, heavy and exact. I began with words I'd repeated to myself in empty rooms. There is a difference between being seen and being recognized. My hands were steady, my voice clear. As lights dimmed and the audience leaned forward, I started to tell what had always needed telling, not as grudge, but as truth. Halfway through, Father McKinney was introduced. I'd last seen him when I volunteered at that little Austin parish, cleaning pews, organizing food drives, sometimes crying behind the altar over the weight of my own invisibility. He walked up, his face framed in candlelight, and began to speak. He told stories. That I anonymously funded funerals in neighborhoods forgotten. That I quietly gave to women in shelters I'd never publicized. That I sent checks to reopen the school my father helped found, in his memory. He spoke not of me as a victim, but as someone who lived in service, with dignity, without recognition. The hall was silent, breath held. You could have heard a pin drop between his words. He described moments no one else knew. He told how I once paid medical bills for a single mother in our town, masking it in scholarship funds. He cited letters I never sent, names I never claimed. I watched faces shift. Some were red with surprise, others looked down at their plates, uncomfortable. My mother sat in the audience, ears still, hands tied in her lap. Callista's seat was empty. She'd arrived late and taken a back corner, as though she might disappear. When Father McKinney finished, he stepped aside. The silence stretched just long enough for the crowd to absorb the redefinition of who I was. Then applause began, slow, uncertain, growing until it trembled across the room like a wave. I stood, eyes locked on the stained glass window behind him, light breaking through darkness. As the clapping swelled, Margot, my mother, stood abruptly. Her face was pale, lips quivering. She raised a trembling hand to her chest. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Not pride, not gratitude, but fear. They're all looking at her like she's the hero, she whispered to the woman beside her. I stepped off the stage, moving past chairs and people, heading toward her. But I didn't walk into an embrace, I kept my distance. I passed her with silent acknowledgement. Her eyes flicked up, confusion and shame wrestling in their depths. When I passed her, I heard her voice crack, he's doing what I never could. No apology. No shame. Just the faintest confession of loss. The audience surged around me, cameras clicked, hands reached out for contact. I felt the weight of applause, not for vengeance, but for reclamation. I bowed slightly and turned, allowing the sound to wash over me, hold me, elevate me. Up ahead, I paused at the catwalk's edge, facing the altar, the stained glass, the crowd. In that moment, something inside me unspooled. A softness that had been buried under decades of grit resurfaced. I swallowed, voice almost a whisper. Forgiveness isn't giving up your voice. It's finding it again on your terms. They cheered. I stepped into the halo of light. Later, as guests mingled and faded conversations resumed, I exited through the side door. Outside, the night air was sweet, magnolia blossoms, stone steps, distant traffic humming. I found a bench tucked under a sculpted fountain, sat, and watched the lights of the cathedral shine behind me, powerful, enduring. I thought of the past, old dinners, empty seats, laughter at my expense. And I thought of now, the witness, the public revelation, the mother's tears, the shift in perception. The spotlight had changed, no longer on Callista's curated family, but on something truer, deeper, harder to ignore. The night draped around me gently. I closed my eyes, feeling that heat in my chest again, not shame, not rage, but release. The same light that cut through the darkness in those glass windows seemed to stretch outward, beyond stained glass and stone. I stood at the fountain's edge, its water shimmering around me. I felt something unresolved, a final whisper in my heart, even the brightest spotlight can't reach the dark corners of the past. The dawn crept in gently, painting the sky in soft blush tones and quiet grays. I sat at my desk before the city truly woke, before horns and voices claimed the morning. The blinds were half open, letting strips of light fall across the mahogany desk, warming the wood and the skin of my arms. Everything inside me still echoed from the gala. Father McKinney's words rang louder than the applause. The weight of my mother's silence had pressed harder than her screams ever did. And yet, in that stillness, something final had passed between us. Not reconciliation. Not absolution. Just an ending. Before the sun fully climbed, I stood and walked across the room. The drawer I'd left slightly open the night before waited for me, quiet and patient. Inside, the letter sat where it always had, edges worn, its envelope bearing my father's unmistakable script. I'd touched it many times before but never dared open it. Until now. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal and carefully unfolded the single sheet of thick paper. His handwriting, strong yet slightly uneven in parts, stared back at me. I read aloud, voice barely above a whisper. My little one. If they ever make you feel like less, remember, quiet strength outlasts loud cruelty. Don't let them win by becoming them. My throat tightened. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explanation. But it was him, or the best parts of him. It was a tether, a whispered promise that I hadn't imagined everything. That he had seen me. Known me. Loved me, perhaps not perfectly, but deeply enough to leave behind this truth. I sat again, letter spread open on the desk, letting the words settle into me like soft rain on dry soil. Outside, the birds began their morning songs. A delivery truck rolled down the street, tires hissing on damp pavement. I reached out and traced the ink with one finger, not to memorize the words, they were already carved into me, but to feel the moment become real. Then, the phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen, pulse quickening. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. But I answered. Jethro. Her voice cracked, brittle as old paper. Why didn't you punish her harder? You had the power. There it was. Not an apology. Not regret. Just bewilderment at my restraint. I looked at the letter in my hand. I could almost feel his presence between the lines, an echo of integrity. I didn't want power, I replied, calm but firm. I wanted peace. There was a pause. A long, heavy silence where I imagined her sitting in the same chair she'd always occupied, queen of her house, prisoner of her pride. I wish things were different, she finally said, barely audible. So do I. The line clicked. She hung up. No goodbye. But this time, I wasn't left aching for more. I closed my eyes and exhaled, slowly. The sharpness in my chest shifted into something gentler. Not closure, but acceptance. Later that morning, I walked outside into the garden behind my home. The air was cool, fresh, filled with the scent of damp soil and early sun. I paused in front of the plaque nestled beneath the largest tree in the yard. In memory of Dad, the garden he never finished. The paths were still uneven. A pile of unused bricks rested near the fence. Some of the flower beds were barren. It was his project, started in good faith but never completed. I knelt beside the plaque and reached into the earth with my bare hands. The dirt was rich and moist. From a nearby pot, I took a small seedling I had bought months ago, something I'd meant to plant but never had the right moment for. Its roots were delicate but persistent, twisting like veins of hope. I lowered it gently into the soil and covered it, patting it down with quiet care. As I stood, brushing the dirt from my palms, the wind stirred. Leaves danced overhead. For a long while, I just stood there, among the unfinished paths, the whisper of trees, the smell of new beginnings. No audience. No applause. Just truth. Back inside, I sat again at the desk and opened my notebook. I didn't hesitate this time. I was never here for the food. I was here to be seen. To be heard. Just once. Now I don't need that from anyone else. I see me. I hear me. I smiled, faintly. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't writing for anyone's approval. I wasn't rehearsing a speech or building a case. I was simply telling the truth, to myself. The letter went back into the drawer, but I didn't lock it. I wanted it there, not as a secret but as a part of me. A chapter one could return to, not to relive the pain, but to remember how far I'd come. Outside, Austin shimmered in the morning light. The city that had witnessed my unraveling was now witnessing my rebuilding. I dressed for the day. Not for battle. Not for revenge. But for presence. For choice. I stepped back into the garden before leaving. The seedling I planted swayed gently. It didn't need to bloom today. It just needed to hold its place. So did I. The ache in me wasn't gone. It might never be. But it no longer ruled me. It had softened, worn down by time, reshaped by clarity. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about forgetting. It's about carrying memory without letting it harden your soul. It's remembering, and choosing peace anyway. Sometimes, the loudest voice in the room isn't the one shouting, it's the one that walks away with grace, refusing to stoop to the level of cruelty. This story wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming dignity, even when no one clapped for it. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong, by your own family? What did you do? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this touched something in you, don't forget to subscribe.